This is a production of Cornell University.
Today we have the pleasure of listening to four experts from Cornell dealing with American policy and American politics. They'll be giving their views on the consequences of yesterday's historic election. My name is Robert Hutchins. I'm the director of Cornell in Washington. This is the kind of event that Cornell in Washington is just thrilled to be involved in. As you probably know, every semester 50 or so students from Cornell go down to Washington. They come from every department and every college. They'll be involved in internships with government offices or private businesses or nonprofit organizations. They take classes and they live at our facility just off of DuPont Circle. And many of the issues that we'll be discussing today are issues that those folks will be working on while they're down in Washington. Let me just say that the idea for this event came from Ted Lowi. We were having a discussion about various things, and he said, "Gee, what about the idea of some kind of event where we discuss policy and politics after the election? It would be something that would interest our students." And I thought it was just a great idea. It's completely consistent with the mission of Cornell in Washington, and given the kind of turnout we've got today, it's clearly another one of Ted Lowi's good ideas. Now, up until yesterday, we had 5 speakers. And then we, because of some personal events, Fred Logevall was not able to join us, so we've got 4 distinguished speakers along with us today. So here's how we're going to proceed. Each speaker will have 8 or 9 minutes to talk about their views of what the Obama administration will be doing and dealing with the politics and policy and problems that confront that administration. And then the panel members will have a chance to react. So we're figuring about 8 or 9 minutes, and then a reaction by the panel members, 4 or 5, something on that order. That should leave us with enough time at the end for you folks to engage in questions and comments and things like that. And that's certainly one of our objectives to do that. Now, let's see, and I should add that my intent is to have us end about at 6 o'clock this evening. So let me talk about the speakers and just make an introduction, and then off we go. Our first speaker is going to be Professor Joel Silbey. He is the President White Professor of History Emeritus. He's written extensively on the 19th century American political history. Indeed, he just completed a study of the presidential election of 1848, which will be published next year. He also writes and lectures about the contemporary political scene and elections. He's also a former director of Cornell in Washington. Then our second speaker will be Elizabeth Sanders. Elizabeth is a professor of government. She's a scholar of American political institutions and has written extensively on the rise and fall of U.S. regulatory institutions, probably a topic that will be coming up today. She's currently working on a book entitled Presidents, War, and Reform, which analyzes the contributions of presidents to both reform legislation and foreign policy choices. Our third speaker will be Richard Booth. He's a professor of city and regional planning, a lawyer by training. He's written extensively on environmental issues. He's currently writing a book about America's failure to respond to the growing global environmental threats. He's had several public policy positions. He's currently a member of the New York State Adirondack Park Agency and a past alderperson with the Ithaca Common Council. And then our fourth speaker is Professor Ted Lowi. He is Cornell's John L. Senior Professor of American Institutions. He is a political scientist with special expertise in policy analysis. Among his many awards are the Stephen Weiss Teaching Award. He's authored or co-authored more than 25 books, one of which, We the People, is a leading American government textbook. And incidentally, he's played a major role in the creation and growth of Cornell in Washington. So with that, let me, please join me in welcoming these folks. Thank you. So with that, let me turn it over to Professor Silbey, and
Thank you.
go ahead.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back involved in Cornell in Washington, and also in a teaching position, which I have not done for several years. Now that the election is over and settled rather decisively, it seems to me we can say a number of things about what will follow. The atmosphere in Washington will clearly be different from what it has been for some time. The signing statements by the President will be fewer. The Supreme Court appointments will probably not come at the suggestion of the Federalist Society, whose executive director, by the way, is a former student of both Ted Lowi's and mine, in case anyone ever tells you that professors influence their students politically. The first thing that occurs as you look at the ground, given that, is that Democrats are traditionally policy and legislation oriented. They like to act. They like to enact. They like to pass laws and do things, something that is not necessarily always true of the Republicans in Congress. And there are, of course, a full plate of issues for them to dig into. We can all name them. They're not surprising or new. The economic crisis that we are in, whether it is a recession, a depression, or a bump in a usually solid economy. The budget problems that are following from that and have existed before that, given the number, how deep the budget deficit has become. Specific issues such as health care, which is out there and which President-elect Obama has made very clear he wants to make a primary focus. And then the myriad problems connected with foreign policy, not only the Iraq and Afghanistan situations, which are quite serious, or the rest of the Middle East, but our rather difficult relations with our so-called allies and with the UN over the last few years. We can all see, I think, at the same time, what is likely to be pushed by the new Democratic Congress. That is a stimulus package to try to address the economic difficulties the nation is in. President-elect Obama has made clear that tax policy will be confronted with specific suggestions that he has made. He has also called for health care reform, and presumably there will be an attempt to follow up on that. There is an extraordinarily high pile of policy initiatives which I suspect the new Democratic Congress and the new Democratic President will try to confront. Which leads me to the second part of my comments. President-elect Obama last night, in his address in Grant Park, referred to the long road to change. It's been a frequent theme of his, and he's right, because from the very beginning, whatever the numbers look like now, there are going to be serious political difficulties for anybody trying to push legislation through. We're all very familiar with the rules of Congress, especially in the Senate, with such a thing as the 60 votes needed to break a filibuster and move bills through the arena. Not a simple majority, but a supermajority. And which raises the first question, will Republicans be chastened and more flexible in their response in ways that they have not been in the last few years when the Democrats controlled Congress and tried to be legislatively active? Well, it's interesting to me that one or two of the more flexible Republican senators are no longer with us. John Warner retired on his own. Senator Domenici retired on his own. John Sununu was defeated yesterday. There are very few Republican senators now there who have made any career out of being flexible when it comes to dealing with the people across the aisles. What will happen, therefore, is, I suspect, a certain amount of confrontation and anger and difficulties for the Democratic leaders in the Senate to get what they consider to be necessary legislation through, as they have had in the past. They are counting on breaking, if they're presently at 56 seats, there are 4 still outstanding, not yet settled. They are hoping, they don't expect to get 60, but they are hoping that they will be able to lure over some Republican votes to break a filibuster. I'd like to know where. The only one you could think of is Susan Collins of Maine, who was reelected yesterday, and she has not been noted for her great courage in facing up to the right-wing control of her party, which is perfectly legitimate. Beyond that, putting aside for the moment the 60-seat, the institutional constraints, there's another interesting problem. Some of the key Democratic committee chairs are slightly older than Ted and myself. Right? Robert Byrd, who is chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is as key a committee as possibly, was 89 at his last birthday. He dodders. He is a tough cookie. He's very strong-minded about things. There will be an attempt to try to move him aside, and one wonders whether it will succeed or not, because other senators are very, very leery about taking on somebody about their earned rights in there. But there are others like this, both in the Senate and the House, people who you would not necessarily want out there in the front as you are trying to push legislation through in a amenable climate, but a difficult set of conditions. And they're going to have to solve that as well. Which brings up to me another issue that has to be talked about, and that is the nature of the Democratic Party now. One thing that has been been mentioned briefly, but is crucial. The Democratic Party elected people yesterday in the House, particularly in Republican territory, or maintained their hold on certain formerly Republican-held seats, such as Denny Hastert's seat in Illinois. These are what I would call outliers within the Democratic Party. That's a good political science word, meaning that they're not part of the Democratic ideological center. And they have already, some of them have already made clear that on some issues they're off the table because they won't vote to support a filibuster if that was to come up on certain things. Now these are things such as abortion, which may become a legislative matter as the Supreme Court confronts Roe versus Wade this session. My time is up. I'll stop there. I'm simply trying to say something about in the euphoria of an election of the kind that the Democrats enjoyed yesterday, sometimes it is not immediately apparent that difficulties exist. But something else I learned from Ted Lowi, the American constitutional system is one of the most complicated systems in the world and difficult to get matters through. So if you're a Democrat, all I can say is be patient. If you're a Republican, there's always 2020.
Comments? From the panel.
Oh, comments from them?
Comments from the panel. Yeah, right.
Oh, I thought we'd do that at the end.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, we can go that route too.
I always have a comment, but we may never get back to the rest of it, so.
Better we hold our.
All right, okay, so fair enough. Let's go for that route then.
Okay, I guess I'm going to play historian here next to the real historian. I'm a political scientist with an historical bent. But for me, a really interesting question teaching the presidency this semester is exactly what we're looking at. What kind of presidency is it? What are likely to be the opportunities and challenges in a historical perspective? We have a very nice theory of the presidency. I think it's one of the smartest theories of the presidency. There really aren't very many, as you can imagine. It's a rather idiosyncratic office with one at a time, so it's hard to generalize. But Stephen Skowronek, who is a Cornell PhD and a student of Ted's and a former classmate of mine, has a very interesting theory of political regimes, or what he calls political time. Good, thanks. And it suggested to me early in the semester that Obama would fit into a cell in Skowronek's fourfold typology, modeled after Ted's fourfold typologies in a way, which is called a preemptive president. In other words, he would be like Bill Clinton. Clinton was a president, according to Skowronek, out of his time. He represented a party that was not the majority party, and so he came in telling everybody, don't worry, I'm not really going to be a Democrat, I'm going to be a new Democrat, and I'm here to end welfare as we know it, and so on. And what his main policy legacies are simply to soften a little bit and round off the rough edges of a Republican agenda, like welfare reform and deregulation and so on. I thought at the beginning of the semester that if Obama won, he would be another preemptive president. And I thought that's how he saw himself. If you looked at the campaign in 2000 and early 2008, he was sort of vague and ambiguous, but he didn't seem very liberal. He didn't talk about democratic policies. He talked about very little in terms of specifics at all. He had some very conservative advisors, people like Paul Volcker, Robert Rubin from the Clinton administration. These are not people you would bring into office if you plan to be a liberal Democrat. But as the semester wore on, it was actually suggested to me by a student in my presidency class, well, maybe he's not going to be preemptive at all. Maybe he'll be a realigning president. And this came in the midst of the financial crisis. I think that really changed everything because, according to Skowronek's theory, the essence of realigning, or as he calls it, reconstructive leadership, is repudiation of the old regime, even before you know what you're going to do. If you think of Franklin Roosevelt especially, even if you don't quite know what you're going to do, you know what you're not going to do, and people elect you because of what you're not going to do. They elect you because they totally repudiate the old regime. And I think as the financial crisis got ever more difficult, the question of whether this might be one of those rare sea changes in American political history really suggests itself. We've had those sea changes, those new political regimes come along in 1896, in 1932, 1980, and maybe a little bit earlier than most of us expected, but with conditions we didn't anticipate. Maybe we're looking at that now. And I think Obama seemed to warm up to the idea as the financial crisis wore on, that maybe he wouldn't be the kind of triangulator that Clinton was, sort of repudiating his own party and signing on to the other team's agenda, but that he might really be a part of the repudiation. And he began to talk openly of repudiation. Their policies of deregulating everything and just cutting taxes as a solution to everything, they don't work. And their policy of aggressive militarism, those three things that stood for the Republican regime since Ronald Reagan, deregulation and militarism and tax cutting, they don't work. Look where they've gotten us. And I think he began to look and to see himself more as a realignment leader. So maybe that's what we're looking at, and that'll make it really interesting. And for Steve Skowronek himself, when I broached this idea to him, he said, well, but look, Obama looks so conservative. And I reminded him that, contrary, of course, to what they said about him on Fox News, the radical socialist, terrorist-loving guy, but those of us who were watching closely and watching the people he relied on for advice really really thought we were going to see another Clinton administration. But I reminded Steve Skowronek as I became more open myself to the idea that this might be one of those sea changes and a repudiation of the Reagan regime, that Roosevelt himself didn't know what he was going to do. And in fact, he ran in 1932 saying that Hoover was a reckless deficit spender. Ho, ho. And then he proceeded to do a very different set of things. Realigning presidents usually don't know what they're going to do before they get there. I think Reagan had a better idea than most, but that realignment had been waiting in the wings for a while. What I think Obama will try to do now is something that looks more like a new version of the New Deal. There will be put in place again rules for the regulation of economic processes to maintain an even keel in the economy, to make sure we don't have these meltdowns. And I think he'll embrace that with much more enthusiasm than did Bill Clinton, who after all signed off on all the deregulation of the Republican administration and even twisted arms to get the Democrats to support it. So that really changes the way I look at it. I think another thing influencing Obama in this direction of creating or recreating the institutions of the New Deal for for the regulation of economic processes is the fact that he's going to get so much pressure from outside. Barely a week from now, the group of 20 will be getting together with the idea of having a new kind of Bretton Woods conference and trying to construct a new set of institutions to regulate economic processes. And an interesting question for me is whether Obama will decide that we can, in this country, construct a tough set of regulatory institutions like the ones we had before 1980, and try to convince the rest of the world to do it like that, or whether we'll say, well, we'll try to sign off on a new set of institutional rules for the global economy at large. I would suggest the former, that we'll work on creating our own somewhat tougher institutions and then hope to influence the rest of the world in that direction. The big problem Obama's going to face, I think in some ways he's going to envy Roosevelt, who had only an economic meltdown but not two wars to try to conclude and get out of. And that's very difficult. The overhang of debt, of deficits. The one Roosevelt inherited was a deficit that was only 34% of the GNP, and we're already up to deficits that are 68% of the GNP, and that's before the bailout. And the overhang of aggregate national debt, how in the world is he going to cut taxes, do health care reform, do infrastructure, both human, educational, and physical, with that kind of debt load? That's the problem. I think he will have to cut, to answer my own question quickly, I think he will have to cut military spending drastically, and he will have to raise taxes on the rich, or he doesn't have a prayer of doing those other things. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dick Booth.
Last night was obviously a historic night, and the United States and the rest of the world will remember it a long time. I've always assumed that a person who wins the presidency for the first time, that is, they may win it a second time, but if they win it for the first time, they wake up the next morning and they say two things. My God, I'm president, and I have the opportunity to do all these wonderful things that I thought I might get a chance to do. And the other thing they say is, oh my God, I'm president of the United States, and the responsibilities are awesome. And I think you learn certain things as president that you probably didn't want to learn about the nature of the world. This morning I heard that there's already a betting scheme in Las Vegas as to who the candidates will be successful, which candidates will be successful in 2012, and they counted down till about 8:15 this morning and said that's the start of the 2012 presidential campaign. So we probably haven't left the era of perpetual campaigns. My best guess on the basis of his rhetoric is that President Obama will try to govern more from the center than from a more leftist position. I say that because the country is deeply divided, and I say that because I think the great lesson of American politics is unless the middle moves, not much happens. The country is facing a number of major issues, and I think there needs to be compromise around workable solutions that will have the support of most Americans. He has said a number of times, we're not red states or blue states, we're all Americans. I think the dialogue in the country has to change dramatically. I think he may want to do that. Whether he's able to do that remains to be seen. But for a very long time in American politics, the basic tenet has been, if you disagree with me, you're both stupid and evil. And the ability to solve large problems in a complex society with those kinds of attitudes makes it very difficult to solve anything. Regarding several specific issues, I'll simply give you very quickly my best guess, and don't bet the farm on any of these, obviously. In terms of the economy, which I think was certainly a big issue a month ago, but now is a much larger issue. And it's not an American economic issue, it's a global economic issue. And I think the new president, the new administration will have to spend immense amounts of time, Congress will have to spend immense amounts of time dealing with it. From what I've read, and I'm certainly not an economist, the best ideas that I've read is that the federal government has to figure out fairly quickly how to undertake a major stimulus in the economy. If you ask what I think the best bet for doing that is, I think it lies in the area of infrastructure, where you can create good jobs and spend a lot of money and do it over time. The nation's needs in terms of water and sewer and bridges and dams and public transportation are immense. So there are hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure needs that have not been met for decades. We live in a very sophisticated city here in Ithaca. It's quite well run. I served for 10 years on city council. But even here, we have century-old sewer pipes, some of which occasionally give way and we have to deal with. So if someone asked me my best advice in terms of economic stimulus, it would be in the area of infrastructure, including schools and water and sewer and roads and bridges and public transportation. In the longer term, obviously the federal government in the last month has intervened in a way that is fairly remarkable in the banking system, debt systems, and so on. My guess is they will not push that aggressively in terms of their trying to control specific decisions by the private sector. I think there will be a good deal of reluctance in the federal government to try to get deeply involved in the specific operations of the private markets. In terms of Iraq, my guess is the president will be less precipitous in his initiation of withdrawal than he has suggested he would be. I think he will, again, move more toward the center. With regard to Afghanistan, he has for a number of months said that he thought we should be more aggressive than President Bush has been, and he may try to do that, although if you may have noticed in the last, I don't know, 72 hours, the Pakistani government has certainly been increasingly vocal about their opposition to American troops or flying-in efforts crossing the Pakistani border. In terms of the environment, which is where my primary expertise is, I think the administration will move for the reauthorization of the Endangered Species Act and one of the major federal statutes, a strengthening of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and spend a good deal of time in the next 4 years undoing some of the regulations adopted by President Bush's administration. In terms of significant tax increases, I think those are doubtful, at least in the short term, because I think the economic advice is going to be the economy is not now in a status where it can support that. Perhaps the biggest thing that the president will have to wrestle with is the fact that he ran on a campaign of change. Change is one of those wonderful words. It means a million things to a billion people. He's going to need, and expectations are very high. He comes into office with a lot of goodwill, but he also comes with a lot of expectations. I think he needs an early success. He needs to do something significant. I think an economic stimulus package that the economists are happy about, et cetera, may be one of those things that could be accomplished fairly quickly. It's very important that he not fail the first time out in terms of a major effort. On NPR this morning, they were discussing perhaps making comprehensive health care his first big initiative. It seems to me we had a president try that. It then became a very serious problem because President Clinton failed, and it had serious implications for the rest of his presidency. Others may force change on him. It may come from Congress. It may come from outside the country. And so the big thing, I guess, about change is to remember that whatever change he proposes, a good number of people are going to stand up and say, stop, not that. That's not the change that I voted for. That's the, both the advantage and the disadvantage of running on a program of change. Another major job in the first year will be appointments. The Republicans have been in Washington for 8 years. There are hundreds of positions, key positions that require appointments, many of which require confirmation by the Senate. This will have to be a major effort of President Obama, President-elect Obama's between now and the inauguration. It will consume immense amounts of time and effort in the first year. Many of you may remember that President Clinton stumbled badly in his first year in terms of appointments, and they dragged on for a long. There was a huge fight, for example, about the Attorney General that, again, weakened the Clinton presidency in ways that were fairly long-lasting. A number of Republican holdovers, I think, will stay in office for a period of time because they're there and they presumably have some experience. They then will eventually change. I expect President Obama will appoint some Republicans in his cabinet. I think he's going to make an effort at least to be partially bipartisan, and he may receive a fair amount of resistance from that from Democrats in Congress. And certainly he has to anticipate the possibility that he's likely to have 3 or 4 appointments to the Supreme Court. Justice Breyer is 70, Justice Ginsburg is 75, Justice Stevens is 88, and the possibilities of a number of appointments because of people wishing to step down or because of health is certainly a possibility. 4 things that I think he will not do, and those are also important. I do not think he's going to push for reform of the Electoral College. I think that's been dead since 2000 because the small states realized the Electoral College gives them more influence. I think President Obama's victory last night is expanded because while he won by I don't know, 5 or 6 percentage points, his election in the Electoral College is quite outstanding and quite substantial. I don't think he will try to do anything about redrawing the boundaries of how we go about drawing boundaries for congressional seats. One of the biggest scandals in American government is most of the people sitting in Congress are in seats in which they can't be defeated because they draw the lines. And I think the country needs a bipartisan mechanism for drawing congressional boundaries so that we have fair elections in Congress. I don't think he's going to deal with campaign finance reform, which I think is a huge mistake, but I think his success in dealing with the internet has probably pushed campaign finance reform off the table. And finally, in terms of global environmental issues, which I've spent some time thinking about, it seems to me that one of the primary messages a new administration thinking about where we're going with the global environment should be in the next 4 years, we will raise the price of energy in the United States to its equivalent in Western Europe. I was in Poland this summer. Gas was selling for $9 to $10. I can tell you if President Obama suggests that, he will face a massive amount of resistance in the American public. The American public hasn't been talked to honestly about the nature of the environmental problems we increasingly are facing worldwide. I think we owe any new president our best wishes and a reasonable degree of support. I think we have a capable person facing immense responsibilities, and once you run for president, the big issues become yours, all right? And that's the reality. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to do something I've never done before, which is to read directly from a text, but it's an interesting decision that I've made to give a sense of how the Europeans are reacting to this election. And it happened accidentally for me. I got a call on Monday from a reporter from Il Mattino in Italy. I'd just been over there in early September, and I guess she had a memory. But anyway, she wanted to set up a date to send me some questions by email to which I should respond, not by telephone, because getting the translations would be better if I emailed back my answers. So I have this dialogue between us. I'd like to read you the questions and the answers because those are my best efforts to answer to someone to whom I feel, and any reporter to whom I feel responsible. So I'll try to do that because they are worthwhile for us to take into account, but at the same time, they are a reflection somewhat of the concerns, not only in Italy, but elsewhere. And so I thought it might be uplifting. It certainly was to me to have to respond to these questions. So here I go. First, I'll read a part of her question, then I'll answer with my whole answer. So the first is, the so-called Bradley effect doesn't seem to show The black Obama goes to the White House, voted also by all the ethnic minorities, in other words, elected by all the elected minorities. An epochal change only till yesterday hard to imagine, in spite of the political polls. The United States not ready to elect a woman as president, choose an Afro-American, and many movies in the late 19th century have shown us. Did you expect things to go this way in what kind of prejudice we live by? So here's my answer. There's always been a Bradley effect, but it is deeper and deeper into the recesses of shame as more and more Americans are racially liberated. Deeply hidden prejudices are too marginal to count in most elections. Are we less liberated in our prejudice against women? It appears to be yes. We are not as liberated. We are less accustomed to women in high places. Even now, there are far more black CEOs than women, even more black athletic coaches than female. We have fewer role models. Note that in most of the older countries in the world, they've had experiences with female monarchs and heads of state. Hillary is making a major contribution even in defeat, but her defeat was due to poor choice of strategy, not gender. Hillary did not appreciate American federalism just like you Europeans don't appreciate it. There are no national political parties in America. There are no national political parties. They're all, the so-called National Party is a coalition of 50 state parties. Hillary's strategy in the nomination process was the courtship of her lead in the national polls. Obama beat her by building a coalition around himself, state by state. That's my answer to the first question. One that you're worth interesting because most of you think there's a national party, which there is not. So, thanks to federalism. Second question. Since the beginning, Obama has shown a strong mediatic charisma. I'll explain that in a minute. It took me a while. Strong mediatic charisma. Good thing to use in a political campaign that was, since the beginning, a perfect media masterpiece. But how substantive is there in him? How much substance is there in him being charismatic? Here's my answer to number 2. There has been a transformation of the presidency into a plebiscitary office. All of you know what plebiscitary means. If you've had 111, you know president. Obama is truly charismatic, but charisma is a dangerous virtue. Obama has it, but he will have to set it aside in order to maintain control of his loosely jointed national coalition. If he is to succeed, he has to hit hard and hold. I'm optimistic because he seems to have another virtue, patience, but he must hit hard and hope to ride through the 4 years. Third question. The economic crisis, has had a central role in determining the Republicans' breakdown. Therefore, it will be among the first things in the president's agenda, or will it be the first thing? Do you think that with Obama, there will be a return to the New Deal and to politic or social reforms? My answer, the economic crisis did work to the benefit of the Democrats, and Obama had the finesse to take the best advantage of it. But the Republican Party was already coming apart. Its 20-year hegemony was based on a moral/religious movement, and religious movements are notorious for coming apart through schisms. I dedicated a book to this in 1996, a second edition in 2006. It's one of the best-known unpublished secrets in the United States. Just consider the schismatic history of Christianity and Islam, and you can imagine what's happening to the Republican Party as I speak. Fourth and last, nope, I think I have 4 and 5. Never mind, it's not last. Fourth, will the United States move to the left? And the world too may be to the left. I didn't get to that one. But will the United States move to the left? Are we going left? No. Americans don't even understand what left means. We are actually, that's me talking. We are actually going toward a significant expansion of government intervention, and that is just as much a strategy of the American right as the American left, so-called. The superior formulation of America and how we're going is corporatist, or what many call welfare capitalism. That's precisely what we're in today, welfare capitalism, or capitalist welfare. Within that, there will be some wealth redistribution, but within the zone of tolerance of the upper 1% of the holders of wealth. This crisis may turn out to be an opportunity to reduce the gap between the top and the bottom. Number 5, excuse me, one of the main charges, she asks, McCain has addressed to Obama during the presidential campaign was that he was unskilled in foreign politics. Can foreign politics be his Achilles heel, his weak point? Yes, Obama is unskilled in foreign affairs, but almost every president we've ever had shares that same disability. Obama is a quick learner, and he has an advantage with his recognition and acceptance that Pax Americana is over. This puts us back in the safer realm of diplomacy and bargaining, and he is very adept at that. Again, with that quality of patience. Foreign policy may turn out to be the source of the legacy he will leave. Let us hope that he can wind down the hubris that has poisoned not only George W. Bush, but 4 or 5 of his predecessors, both Democratic and Republican. Hubris. And with a name like Barack Hussein Obama, he will enhance international bargaining. Number 6. Michael Walzer, some of whom you know, indicates Obama has postmodern political, a symbol who goes beyond the racial divisions. Can we say that his success coincides with that? But the question is about postmodern. I love Michael Walzer. My answer is Michael Walzer has been one of the best minds in American intelligentsia, but he has lived too long in the protected atmosphere of Princeton Center for Advanced Study. I'm just jealous, maybe, I guess. The post in postmodern is a prefix. Post actually means simply we don't know what we have or if confronting, and what label do we have for it. That's what post means. Let's talk about post-present, which is the phenomenon to concentrate on, and I think this will be an era of retreat, not into the old American isolationism, but to a world of equal sovereigns. And the best thing Obama could do is to take the lead in putting aside all religion and politics. Take inspiration from Dante. I'm taking poetic license. Abandon God, all ye who enter politics. That's my last message to the Italian interrogation. Thank you very much.
So comments within the panel on each other's thoughts and things like that?
It's not chow time, but chow anyway. All right.
The question from your Italian interrogator about his Obama's foreign policy and experience suggests a common thing, misunderstanding that people often have. It is not only Obama's presidency. He will be surrounded by an extraordinary wave of advisors, associates, cabinet secretaries, etc., who are supposed to help him in articulating what he may believe, and none of us, except Dick briefly, mentioned the appointments that he has coming up. And the question before you know anything about the appointments is, do we have any sense of what kind of judgment he has about selecting people for the crucial positions? There's all kinds of speculation. Robert Gates will stay on as defense secretary. Richard Lugar will become defense secretary. No, John Warner will become defense secretary, and so on. I'm just curious as to what notions any of you have about Obama's expertise or abilities in this area.
I'd like to add just one little bit to that, which is the kind of thing that would lead to the, oh God, what am I going to do now as president, which waking up that first morning is asked. Not only does he have the nightmare of vetting as well as making choices that give off an impression of what his administration will be. Not only will they serve him, but what kind of message is taking place. But also it's the beginning of the plebiscitary part. As soon as he takes the inauguration, we start judging right away. It's a plebiscite every week or every 2 weeks when they ask the question, do you approve or disapprove of the way the president's doing his job? And it starts off in the 65% rating, and from there on it goes down and down and down for 4 years. It's like what Tom Lehrer used to say, he's sliding down the razor blade of life. This is the only truth that you can say about the presidency. They start with a high grant of goodwill, of consent. And it's downward all the way from there until they reach a point of disgrace where they have to engage in deceit to make up for it. So that's what presidents confront. And Obama cannot escape that, but he has to understand from Lowi what he has to confront. He might as well get used to it. I might even go on to say I'm the only person qualified to be President of the United States because I'm the only one with wisdom enough to say no if they offered it to me. That's how bad it is. So, comment?
Oh, sure. On appointments, I think we'll know a lot from the initial appointments. I think Obama as Clinton, Obama the preemptor, has been very close and has been touting people like Paul Volcker and Robert Rubin. If he does that, we'll know he's not going to be Franklin Roosevelt. He's not going to be a realigning president because these are very much the old school. These are people who got us into this problem and hardly the people to get us out. Likewise, Larry Summers, you know, we know why he left Harvard. This is not the kind of advisor, but I think his proclivity is to do what Roosevelt did and to bring in a very eclectic and lively brains trust and argue with them and have them argue with each other. By all accounts of those who know him best and like Roosevelt, he's not so easily knowable, but he does like that kind of repartee. And I think, speaking personally, it's going to be so nice to have a smart president, a president who thinks, a president who doesn't think with his gut, thinks with his frontal lobes, who deliberates, who gets a lot of information, and I hope we're going to have a pleasant surprise, and he will look for young and eclectic people with new ideas. He's going to need them. As far as the prediction about governing from the center, I do agree with that at the beginning, but remember, Roosevelt did that too at the beginning. I'm going to be president of all the people. I'm not going to alienate anybody, but as time wears on, you can't do that, and especially in the deteriorating economic climate he's going to be faced with. He's going to have to make choices. And I think he's going to have to alienate people. That always comes, and maybe popularity drops. But then when you realize what your coalition is and it becomes a little more coherent, then you're the second New Deal Roosevelt, and it does begin to make a lot of sense. So you're not trying to please everybody, including Wall Street.
I think Senator Obama or anyone who runs for president knows, but they don't really know what I'm about to say, and that is there's a vast gulf between campaigning and governing. Your instincts, what you think about, what you do are very, very different. And I think anybody who's successful at this level understands that intellectually. They do not understand the reality of it until they have actually taken the office. I may get in trouble for this. I will say to you that I voted against George Bush twice. I don't believe anybody who becomes president is stupid, all right? I think the demands of the office are too high. We may disagree with them fundamentally. I don't think they're stupid people. The comparison to FDR is an interesting one, and I think there are some comparisons that can be made, but we'll have to wait, obviously, to see whether they're useful. But it's important to remember a couple of things about FDR. One is he didn't have to operate in a 24-hour spotlight. He did an awful lot of stuff completely behind the scenes the public didn't know about. It's hard today to realize that most Americans knew that FDR had an illness, but they had no idea of the degree to which he was afflicted because the national news media and the national government were in cahoots with each other basically to hold the story away from the American people. So we live in a different world. Roosevelt was a masterful political manipulator, thinker, and so on. It's very interesting to know that at least before he became president, I think even in some groups after he became president, and still, he was seen as a second-rate intellect. Even within the Democratic Party, he wasn't recognized as one.
Keynes even said that.
Right. He wasn't. Roosevelt wasn't, you know, the brightest guy that the Democrats could have put forward. Several other quick things. One, in terms of going forward, we don't trust government. And so as we look for perhaps more government intervention, the reality is we don't trust government. I began my career in the Adirondacks in 1972, right after Watergate. And I found out the people of the Adirondacks mistrusted big government, and all the news that summer was about the FBI and Nixon and the Watergate tapes. No, the tapes weren't known yet, but the whole scandal that led to Nixon's resignation. I found out the people in the Adirondacks weren't worried about those people in Washington. They were worried about me, all right, because we were involved in regulating land development in the Adirondacks, and that was the subject of a great deal of distrust. We also don't like regulation. We tolerate regulation, but we don't like it. We are darn well sure our neighbors should be regulated, but we're not sure that we should be regulated. And again, more government intervention often is in the form of regulation. And finally, I return to a point that I commented on. I believe that unless we repair the nature of our political dialogue, we're going to continue to be in for a lot of trouble. Money counts in campaigns enormously, and we're not close to fixing that. We've created an in-your-face, as I said before, if you don't agree with me, you're obviously my enemy, kind of attitude that is pervasive and destructive. In the last 2 weeks of the election, most of the stories are about what the polls are. They aren't about what the candidates are doing, what they're saying, whether they'd be good presidents or not. They're about what the polls say, which is an absolutely asinine way to discuss a national election. And finally, Washington lives on 1 and 2 year cycles. The big problems in America won't be solved with 1 and 2 year solutions. The 1 year cycle is the annual budget focus, all right, which is crippling enough. The big focus, though, is the 2 year focus. Every member of the House of Representatives has to run for re-election every 24 months. And so Washington's ability to think long-term about the big challenges facing this country are very, very limited. I think if we think about the future in Washington terms, it's between now and the next election. That's all that really matters. And I think that's not going to solve the problems this country has, and hopefully President Obama can at least begin to change that.
I'd like to comment on a number of things that have been whizzing by me here. First of all, President Bush is a graduate of Yale. Make of that what you want. He probably couldn't get into Cornell.
Without his father.
Yeah, I'm also struck by that this panel has turned into a seminar on Franklin Roosevelt. We don't have a Franklin Roosevelt, but I would suggest the only way that some of the things that Dick has referred to and I did earlier in my presentation that can overcome many of these things is a sense of crisis. When there is a deep sense of crisis that permeates into the people, as Roosevelt discovered in the years after what made Roosevelt into the Second New Deal was the Democratic success in the congressional elections in 1934, which just expanded the size of his majority. My point is that if there is a deep sense of crisis, whether it be after 9/11 or about the economy, which would be more likely here, much of this can be accomplished if there is a will to do it, if there is an effort, a consistent effort to do it. And that we don't know because Mr. Obama has not faced this kind of thing. And this sense of crisis is extraordinarily rare in our history. Most of the time, we have felt good about things. But the times that I can think of, the Civil War crisis, the World War II crisis, and before that, the economic crisis of the early 30s, things were accomplished. We didn't turn into the Socialist Republic of the United States, but things were accomplished in reform and in legislation. And here I agree with Ted, and then of course we slip back. When there's not a crisis, we slip back to business as usual. I guess as a historian I say, what else is new? There's very little you can do about it unless you first of all break down the size of the country, then we wouldn't have many of these problems. Or second is to move to name me a country, quick, where we can take it easy. What?
Bulgaria.
All right, Bulgaria. The Bulgarian program, the Cornell Bulgarian program will start next year.
That's a comment. Okay, so let's open it up to the group, and please, this gentleman here in the middle.
I wonder if you could comment comment on the
Speak up.
role of the media in a democracy.
Stand up and-
I want,
Speak out, let me hear you.
could you comment on the role of the media in a democracy? It seems as though the media has misinformed us much more than informed us. What can we do, and what do you think about that?
I'll jump in and say that media gets a bad rap. First of all, media is a plural noun, and different kinds of media have different kinds of effects. The one that I think is the most powerful factor in our change of governance, when I talk about the plebiscitary presidency, is the advance and the credibility, no truth, but the credibility of public opinion polling, where with 1,500 sample, you can make estimates that are credible to people of the whole 300 million or the 200 million or 100 million you're after to estimate. Given that kind of measurement of public opinion, it puts a constant pressure. That's the constant campaign on one side and the constant judgment on the other. No Roman empire ever had to put up with plebiscites the way we do through public opinion. So that's one medium of communication. There are other media, but to me the most insidious, the most problematic is the public opinion industry, far more dangerous than the TV or the other paraphernalia of communication.
I was wondering what your thoughts are on what the Republicans do now. Do they completely evaluate just, some of their policies? Do they just simply look around and look at the best parts of the Obama campaign and what made them affect them and try to steal them for next time? Do they, and in particular, if you could also address, if you saw the millennial breakdown of how they voted, it was almost 2-1 for Barack now, and if that's a group of people that is known for kind of instant gratification.
Did you all hear the question? No. Oh. Whoever responds to it, repeat the question. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm generally asking about what the Republican strategy is now, and if they actually reevaluate kind of their values and what they've been promoted in their policies, or if they just kind of say, our marketing campaign didn't work this time, let's take the best parts of Obama and use it next time. And in particular, just about what happens to the millennials who are obsessed with instant gratification and everything in life if they don't see substantive change in the next 4 years. Do they get completely disenfranchised? Do they turn to third parties? And how do you think they'll react?
When you refer to millennials, to whom are you?
Sorry, typically, what is it, 18 to 28 now?
I've never heard that expression used in that way. Okay.
Born in 1980 and after.
Okay. Did everyone hear the question now? What the basic of the question is?
How are the Republicans going to do that?
Yeah. Thank you, Ted. That was the part.
I'll just rephrase the question. I want Joel to talk.
That was the part of my introduction that I didn't get to do. The Republicans are in very serious trouble, and they've lost. They've lost 2 congressional elections in a row, big time. They don't have a core of young leadership or younger leadership. One of the things we haven't mentioned is that I think this election sees a changing of the generations in American politics with the coming of Obama and so on, and the passing of some of the very much older. McCain's not going to run for president again, and so on. And many of the Republicans who have either lost or have retired are part of the older generation. They don't have a leadership core. They don't have a natural succession in there. The Democrats didn't either. 4 years ago, after Bush won, we didn't know anything about Barack Obama except that he had given a speech at the National Convention, and he emerged out of this. With the Republicans, at the moment, who is in the lead to be the next Republican presidential candidate? Not Giuliani, because they'll never accept him. Not Michael Bloomberg, because he will have spent so much buying New York that he won't have anything left. Who else have they got? Mitt Romney, not as long as he's a member of the Mormon Church. So the obvious candidate at this point is Sarah Palin. Now listen, guys, it's time for a woman to be president. It's not going to be Hillary because she'll be too old by the time this is over. She's what, 61, 62 now. And so Sarah Palin is the future of the Republican Party. Now, I'm only being partially facetious. I can't think of someone else. Ted probably can. But look what happened. I mean, so many Republicans were wiped out yesterday who were promising and so on, that one wonders what will happen. I don't think it's going to take time for them to regroup. And how do losing parties regroup in a situation like this? They be mean. They be as mean as they can be, because the only way they're going to gain traction is to undercut the majority.
I have to say that, sorry. Well, a student in my morning presidency class had a really interesting suggestion for the Republicans. He is from Louisiana, and he suggested the current governor of Louisiana, if you want to combine Barack Obama's good points, Bobby Jindal is young and smart and well-educated, a person of color with an international aura, and that might be an interesting way to go.
I think the question needs to be turned around. The best examples we have in recent politics is parties that win big act irresponsibly and don't make the most of their time governing. I think the big question is what the Democrats are going to do now with the opportunity they have. And I don't think there's any guarantee that they've thought through a program. There are lots of possibilities. There aren't a lot of things that, in fact, will likely be done in 4 years. There's a long set of analyses that indicate a president can do something big in the first 24 months of office. And after that, they're running for re-election. So I think the big question is, what have the Democrats learned? And what are the large things that they need to do? The best Republican strategy probably is wait and see where the failures are. The problems are big. They are going to require bipartisan solutions. And if they don't happen, I don't think what happened yesterday is the country's now democratic, all right? I think what happened yesterday is the country is deeply frustrated about not being able to move on a number of very large questions. If this administration fails, I think there will be opportunities for others to respond. And remember, most presidents come out of the governor's offices, all right, in the last century, and there probably will be governors.
The Democrats' policy, all right? They've thought about it, but they've thought about it in a much broader sense than they did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So they're not thinking about it as us, as this isolated party. So I apologize for taking exception, but I thought I heard you say, oh, I don't know if the Republicans have thought out their policy. I haven't studied that or whatever.
Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
We had a discussion this summer about energy prices. The discussions were all about how to lower the price of energy. I had a student go back the other day and look at the price of gasoline today compared to 1962 when it was 31 cents and I was in high school. Okay. It's gone up about 8 cents, all right, in 1962 dollars. We've had an energy policy in this country for a long time. Republicans and Democrats have supported it. Keep the price of gas as cheap as possible. That policy isn't going to work in the long term. The Democrats, no one in the federal government is yet willing to grapple with some of these big issues.
In the 20th century, and you could argue that...
Speak up.
In the 20th century, and you could argue that there was an acceleration of this under the Bush administration. We have a trend of executive branch power grabs. We have executive privilege. The signing statements are mentioned earlier. Do you think this trend is going to continue under an Obama administration, or is he going to start to roll it back? Maybe sort of fix the balance of power between congressional deferment to the executive branch?
That's a very, very good question. And my biggest fear is that since the Democrats cooperated with the Republicans in the takeover by the presidency of our whole governmental system, my predecessor, Clinton Rossiter, published a book in 1948 called Constitutional Dictatorship, which happens during war, and then the expectation is that the dictatorship will go away once the war is over. What happened in the 20 years between Reagan and Bush II? They created a presidency that could declare its own definition of an emergency that would call forth that moment of constitutional dictatorship. And during the Bush administration, where the believable threat, meaning one bomb killing, 3 airplanes killing 3,000 people, have put us in a state of total despair. Absolutely total despair. And the Democrats, out of fear, both of more of that, and out of fear of being blamed, went along. So we have a consensual presidency that is basically transcendent. And I fear that Obama and all the guys around him, including especially Pelosi, are going to go along with it and will demand the same powers that have been created by the Federalist Society and those who became the theorists, including our dear Paul Wolfowitz and so on from Cornell. And to me, that's the greatest danger that we have right now, that the Democrats will pick up on this as though it's an established meaning of our presidential institution. It is the constitutional dictator.
Gentleman all the way in the back.
I have two questions. One is dealing with...
Speak up.
Yeah, there you go.
First question deals with Pakistan. What will Obama do with Pakistan? You just hinted on ago, like 72 hours ago, that Pakistan seems to be a very volatile state. And it's a nation that surrounds Afghanistan, Iran, and it's in a terrorist type situation. What will Obama do for that? And then additionally, what will Obama do with Russia in terms of foreign policy?
I wish Professor Logoval was here, but he asked me on my way over to speak on his behalf. So I will give you my insight onto that. So far as what is going on in Afghanistan, I presume that until he gets his feet settled in, and afterwards, President Obama will rely a great deal on the military and civilians who have been working in there. There's an enormous American infrastructure now in that area, and military headquarters. But I also think that they will be thinking through what they want to do in terms of getting out of Iraq and how to handle Afghanistan, and I think that's going to take a lot of conferring with the British, the French, and others. So I think that as so far as Russia is concerned, I think that already there are indications of a warming relationship. I mean, after all, Obama's a socialist. Some warming relationship with it. He may, I think they'll try to warm that up because there's too much at stake if they don't.
I want to confess a worry I have about Pakistan, and I really hope I'm wrong about this. But if you look at the pattern over time of presidential uses of force, there's an unfortunate tendency of untested presidents, I mean presidents without a military career, without military experience, draft dodgers, etc., thinking of Bill Clinton and George Bush, to try to prove their mettle during the first year, indeed during the first 6 months in office, by bombing somebody. And the best candidate probably would be those Taliban redoubts in the Pakistani borderlands. And Obama has talked pretty tough. I mean, he actually threatened to bomb them. So perhaps he will. I think in general, one can expect a return to diplomacy and multilateralism, but then that's where the institutional incentives to war in our institution kick in. It wouldn't surprise me, though it would really disappoint me, to see warlike gestures on the part of Obama.
Yeah, I'd like a little more of the panel to speculate on Obama's essential policy nature. What is this man really about? And I'd like to use the example of gas prices, because it's a great example. Al Gore said, look, they need to go up. Now, does he actually have a tremendous amount of intellectual scope? As you know, he didn't join the same club. He went off by himself. And he has a habit of thinking things through. Do you think he would actually have intellectual reach and propose a large solution to a large problem, either the Wall Street problem or the environmental problem? Would he do that?
I'll repeat part of it if they didn't hear and give my interpretation of the question is, what kind of a policy package is Obama in a sense? Right. What will come about? Well, we have to go back to Roosevelt one more time, and maybe more than one more time. No one could have predicted, this was inherent in Joel's comments, but I got to make it more explicit. No one could have predicted what Roosevelt and the New Deal would become on the basis of Roosevelt's previous career, plus his positioning in the campaign of 1932, no one could have known what was going to be like within that 100 days, not to speak of the whole 1930s. So some of the greatest presidents, including Abraham Lincoln, who made no speeches whatsoever after he got the nomination. So many presidents go through positioning themselves in ways that hold that coalition together of the separate states that have to make a party. And so Obama's advantage may be his curse, but we cannot know because all we had was the positions that he took that were attractive in order to get rid of the other party. And the best news of all in this campaign and in this election is the end of the Bush administration. That's all we can be sure of at this point.
One of the things I detect in the audience a certain slant about these things, but you're not Bushies. One of the things you might look at, because his name has come up several times here, but also in the speculation of an appointment for Al Gore, if he will take it, not as a cabinet secretary, which is ties you down very much, but as an ambassador at large on climate change. And it's very possible you would do it, that Obama would do it if Gore is willing. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. There aren't many Nobel Prize winners who are government officials in the United States. The other part of it, however, is that anything that he or Obama try to do will run up against an enormous opposition, an enormous range of lobbying, and that's what we don't know, whether the crisis is enough to overcome that sort of thing. And most of all, we complain about gasoline. Who is responsible for that? Not George Bush, not even Ted Lowi. It's us. It's us. You know, you drive 2 blocks. There are more cars on the Cornell campus than in Kazakhstan. The point I'm making is that we blame the political leaders, and in this particular case, you'd be crazy politically to threaten to do something other than improve gas mileage for cars or something like that. You're out of politics. Now, how do you overcome that? And I'm not sure it is overcomable. That's why I think that will become something that it shouldn't fade from sight, but will be something that will still be being debated when the Republicans come back in 2020.
Dick, you wanted to get in?
Just to pick up on that point and then another bigger point. I taught a course in environmental politics for a long time, and I said to students, go down to Wegmans, walk around with your eyes open, you'll learn more about what's really important in American politics than you'll learn from any book, because it is consumer demand that drives most of these big environmental issues. Coming back to the question both about what President Obama will do in Pakistan and also the question about executive power. I think our experience is that presidents' biggest challenges and the ones we actually remember them most for in terms of how they did were things they didn't talk about during the campaigns. I think that's the nature of the job. We elect them because we think this is the best person at this moment in time. What they then have to challenge is the function of lots of things that are beyond their control. I think another basic lesson is that presidents don't give up their power. If a president assumes more power than he's done historically, it's because the other branches haven't resisted strongly enough. Congress has power to control what the president wants to do if they're willing to do it. By and large, Congress hasn't been willing to do that, as Ted said, for a long time. Because in many ways, Congress over and over again for decades in both kinds of administrations has abdicated much of its responsibility. I think one of the early indications that may be telling, does President Obama surround himself with smart, strong-willed people who will give him advice, often conflicting advice, and then how he reacts to it. I think that's one of the best tests of who's going to be a really good president. Go back and read about Abraham Lincoln. He put the strongest political people in the country, a number of whom had run against him for the presidency, in his cabinet, because he figured they were very capable people, and he needed their advice in a time of crisis. Did he always agree with that advice? Absolutely not. He was the president. He understood he was the president. He had to decide. But I think if President Obama surrounds himself with good people who are strong-willed, give him important advice that he may not want to hear at a particular moment, that's a good indication.